Guys, it's Roscoe with Moonlit Fly Fishing. Today going to tie up some simple, well not so simple, pretty fun little pattern, Unbalanced Damsel fly nymph. This is the finished result. Alright, we're going to tie this today on a MLO 54 from Moonlit. This is a long shank jig, or long shank nymph hook traditionally, but we turned it into a jig hook with a simple little procedure. I'll show you that real quick just so you can see how I did it. The hook comes with a straight shank. Take that guy, take your hemostats, measure about 1/8 of an inch away from the eye of the hook, and just fold that. Give yourself that little bend. I've fished these, I'm not worried about it hurting anything, but then you have a place for that slotted bead to sit and give you that jig hook action. Okay, before we do anything, I'm just going to tell you we're using the Semperfli Nano Silk in 12/0 in olive for this fly. Something real strong so you can bind down the heavy embroidery floss for the weave. We'll start out with dressing the hook. I've already waxed my thread. Give it a few turns here behind the eye. Trim that off. Right out of the gate, we're going to put on a pair of mono eyes that are made with glass beads, little red glass beads, same thing you'd find at the craft store, and some 20-pound chartreuse amnesia. Just right over the top of that, and then kind of figure 8 wrap that, 1, 2, and then you can kind of orient that where you want it. And I like it just right there behind the eye of the hook to make room for everything else that's going on this bug. So once you've got that in place with a few of those figure 8 wraps, go ahead and go underneath the whole thing, kind of like a set of dumbbell eyes, and cinch that down tight. And roll that over, and now you can seat that bead. Make sure it's slung like it's supposed to, and then just come right over the top of that, and then right back over the other side. It's a little trickier to do then. Once you've got a few wraps, it gets a little easier because then the thread grips itself. And that'll help push that bead into that slot and hold it upside down. Okay, a little bit of super glue to keep all of that from moving here anymore, and you should be good to go. Continue your thread back to the tie-in for the tail. Go back just to where the hook bend starts. And the tail we're tying in today is going to be made with partridge, but we're going to use some of the fluffier parts instead of the fancy feathers. This is a Hungarian partridge dyed golden olive. And if you open one of these bags, there's going to be a whole bunch of little feathers that look kind of like marabou, and some of them that look a little bit more like a normal partridge. Picked through and found one of these little guys. That's what you want for this bug. Take all that fluffy stuff, preen it back, and then you'll have a nice little tail that'll give the fly a little bit of movement. Tie that in. Trim off the waist. Now we're going to tie in a rib. And for this fly we use the Semperfli medium size tying wire, 0.02 in chartreuse. I like to double this one up so I get a twisted wire effect. So to put that on there, I've got a piece of wire that's about twice as long as I would normally use. Pin it right to the shank of the hook there, go in front and behind, tie that in and just put it in your material clip. Drag that back up. Okay, so now we need to tie in a dorsal line that's going to go right up over the back side of the fly, and since this is a jig hook, this is the hardest part. We're going to tie it in with the dorsal line on the inside of the hook bend, just for the fun of it. That material is thin skin. It's the green speckled thin skin. Take this thin skin, now that you've removed it from the paper backing, cut a small little triangle for a tie-in point, just so that you have something small to work with there at the back of the bend of the hook. Now to tie that in, just hold it on the side of the hook shank and take a loose wrap, and as you tie that in, you can kind of let it spin those first couple of turns until it straightens up and is where you want it to be there, which is right on top of the inside of the hook bend. So now it's right where I want it, and I can just tuck it right out of the way. Finish tying that in, and we're going to tie in the embroidery floss for the weave. So the first thing on the weave that you need to know is you should always tie the lighter color in on the side towards you. Just makes it easier to remember what you're doing, and since this is a jig hook, that's going to be this first one. Both of these materials are found at the fabric store or Walmart. It's DMC embroidery floss. This is just a metallic version of it in gold, and then green. The color for the green is number 907, if you're curious about that. And I think most of you can tell the difference between metallic thread and not metallic, so pick the gold stuff and you'll be good to go. Okay, so to tie these in, just leave them on the very side of the hook shank. You want both of these to sit parallel to the hook shank, not on the top or not on the bottom, but on each side. So a couple of wraps, seat it on the side of the hook shank, and pull that back into your material clip. Same thing on the opposite side. Pin it to where it's just on the side of that and hold that back. And if they roll, take a second, it's worth it, and make sure they stay on the side of the hook shank. And then I'll just hold both of those in place and loosely wrap them until I'm down to the tail, and then I can tighten that up and advance back and lock down that thread. So now each of those pieces can fold back, tie that off so that they don't pull out, and then trim off your waist. Alright, now here's the part where you want to kind of shape the body profile here, and I like, on these woven flies, I like to keep a pretty smooth but flat profile, kind of like a wider rather than round. And just take a minute and build up that shape. Make sure that I check the whole thing for smoothness, because it'll make the weaving a lot easier if the body is really parallel and smooth. See how you're working out that taper a little bit. Continue to clean that. Okay, once you got that about where you want it, I like to make sure it's good and flat. Use the hemostats again and just crush all of that you just did nice and flat. And you can see that that changes the profile pretty dramatically. Okay, now that that's done, just go ahead and whip finish this thread and get it out of the way so you can do the weave. Okay, keep that wire out of the way. Okay. Take the lighter color underneath and the darker color on the top, and just keep it that way throughout the whole fly. Keep even tension on your thread, maybe slightly pushing back towards the bend of the hook to keep those weave knuckles staying tight to each other. But that's the most important thing, is the constant thread pressure. Each time you do 2 completed sets of this, you end up with a cool segment of the body. You want to weave right up to behind the bead, and once you've got that last section, just take the whole package and pull it straight down and hold it tight. Okay, now you're going to put the thread back into the play here, and to do that you just take a couple of wraps in front of the bead or behind the bead, and then pass that through. So still holding tight on those floss ends, and then wrap that tight. Oop. It's a bunch of stuff to manage, but it actually does clean up pretty well. Once that's there, try to wrap it up to the top so that I can bury all those loose ends in the tie off of the thin skin. And just as a little bit of added insurance now to make sure that none of that comes undone, put a little drop of super glue in here. Before I bring that thin skin and stuff up now, I'll just give a couple extra turns of this thread to make sure that all of that is bound tight. Okay, now we'll bring that piece of thin skin up for the dorsal line. You can kind of stretch it a little bit, don't overstretch it or it'll break. It's kind of a delicate material when it gets stretched. Couple of wraps there, let the super glue do its job, and just trim that thin skin off right there behind the bead. Okay, now the next step is the rib. On these woven flies, you always are going to want to counter rib or wrap towards you instead of away from you. I like to use my hemostats on this technique because I like to spin this wire and give it a little bit of a cool effect. So clip the hemostats on the wire, the double ends, and just twist all those guys up until you get a nice evenly spun wire. And since it's clipped to the hemostats, I can just let that dangle there for a second while I get ready. Put a half hitch in this guy. Pull my bobbin cradle around and let that rest for a second. And then I'm going to rib this fly. So the first wrap is going to come around just the very bottom, and then you're going to start to walk up like stairs up that weave. In between each knuckle, you'll drop that wire and it'll kind of just work its way through. Make sure you're pushing the thin skin down each time instead of kicking it back up. And then when you're done, you end up with a cool little segmented body. That bobbin cradle out of the way, reel in this extra line here, give that all a nice tug, and tie that wire off. And trim that off with the flush cut pliers. Okay, so now you've got a body, you've got a dorsal line. Now we need some legs and a wing case. I'm going to crush this down a little bit just so that it all fits in there the right way. Okay. Make sure that that wire is tucked in tight so it doesn't break my thread. Alright, now let's put on a wing case. The wing pad or wing case is made out of the same pattern of thin skin, but this one is just a brown speckled instead of the green. Same kind of thing, little triangle, soft loop or soft wrap, whatever you want to call it, and set that guy in place. Alright, now all we need to finish the fly legs and a little bit of dubbing. The legs that we're using are from the Red Shed Fly Shop. They are silicone micro legs, and they're just kind of a olive modeled. Barred black on olive is actually the color name. Tie a single overhand knot in each leg, and then tie them in on the side of the hook shank. So one on one side, a couple of wraps to hold it in place. One on the opposite side. For me, I like to rotate my vise and make sure I'm getting them measured for length the right way. A couple of wraps to hold those in place. Make sure everything's looking jive and call it good. Alright, now we just need to dub the thorax, wrap the wing case over the top, and the fly will be done. Get a little bit of wax on my thread because we like to add some dubbing in enough quantity to cover up that tungsten bead as much as possible. The dubbing that I'm using, is the remix dubbing in Caddis color. This is Remix Volume 2 from Doug Clow out in Ohio. He makes small batch custom dubs. This is the best stuff you can get. If you contact Doug on Instagram at DC Ohio, he's the guy. You'll be on a long waiting list because none of us are going to let you buy any of this dubbing before we get it. So good luck to you. But I'm not going to help you get it, so good luck. It's the stuff. Now we just got to spend a little bit of time working this dubbing over that tungsten bead, and if you notice, it doesn't want to do it willingly because it's round. But if you work your way up there and kind of walk that up, you can cover up that bead, at least on the top side, to put that thorax cover on. Okay, now that we've got that there, we'll pull this thin skin piece over, and if you look at dragonfly, damselfly, nymphs, they have pretty small wing pad in relation to their body, and so it's just a tight little thorax piece there. Tie it off right behind the eyes. Pull that back, a couple of turns there, and then just trim that guy off. And basically your fly is done. Now we'll keep these out of the way, make sure that that little thin skin piece is bound down tight, and then a whip finish and a little bit of head cement, and you guys should be good to go. One, two, three, four. Get behind those eyes. 1, 2, 3, 4. There you have it. The Unbalanced Damsel. And to get those legs all the right length, I just rotate it around so they hang freely. Pull them all down. And just trim them. There you go, guys. Jig hook damselfly. Thanks for watching.